Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into one of the biggest, most difficult questions out there, the problem of pain, and how it squares with the idea of an all-powerful God. We're going to be breaking down some really challenging source material on this exact dilemma. When you're talking about something like this, you can't just start with big abstract ideas. It doesn't work that way. You have to start with the raw, brutal reality of suffering. And the source material we're looking at today does exactly that. It grounds this whole massive conversation in real, historical horror. This quote, it comes from Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, and it's just devastating. As he says, his experience left him feeling terribly alone in a world without God. Now, the source we're pulling from really emphasizes this point. For Wiesel, the sheer brutality he saw wasn't just something that challenged his faith, it shattered it. It was so profound it felt like words themselves stopped making sense. And that experience, that raw horror, forces a question that is echoed down through centuries of human tragedy, right? It's the question at the absolute heart of what we're talking about today. When you're faced with evil that profound, where was God? So how in the world do you even begin to answer a question like that? Well, the source material we're exploring, it puts forward an answer that, I've got to say, a lot of people find really difficult. It challenges a very common way of thinking about God's role in evil, and it presents a different and, for many, a pretty unsettling perspective. And at the absolute core of this view is a concept called divine sovereignty. Now, what does that mean? Well, as you can see, it's not just the idea that God allows things to happen. No, this is the view that God actively wills and ordains every single event that comes to pass, all while, and this is key, not being the author of sin himself. And this right here, this slide, shows the critical difference. A really common view is that God just kind of passively allows evil. He stands by, he doesn't stop it. But the view we're unpacking today is totally different. It argues that God actively ordains it. He isn't some idle spectator just watching from the sidelines. He is purposefully bringing it about for his own reasons. Okay, so to back up this pretty radical claim, the source points to a whole host of passages from Scripture. The argument is that you see God described as taking this really active role in calamity over and over again, sending an evil spirit, a strong delusion, poisonous snakes. The point being made is that this isn't some weird one-off, but a consistent theme you find throughout the text. Right. So this immediately brings up a huge, glaring paradox, doesn't it? If God ordains everything, then how can anyone be held responsible for what they do? I mean, who's really to blame here? It's a question that really cuts to the core of everything we think about justice and free will. And here's the wild part. The source argues that these two things, God's sovereign plan and human wickedness, they're not mutually exclusive. The idea is that they can both be 100% true at the exact same time. It's not an either-or, it's a both-and. And the story of Judas betraying Jesus is held up as the prime example of this. Just look at the two columns here. On one hand, the text says this was all part of God's definite, preordained plan. Jesus knew it was coming. But on the other hand, Judas is held completely responsible for his choice. It's called an act of wickedness, and he faces judgment for it. Both realities are presented as totally true, happening at the same time. And you see this same tension way back in the Old Testament with the story of Joseph. I mean, think about it. His brothers sell him into slavery out of pure jealousy and hate. Their intent was obviously evil. But then, years later, Joseph looks back on all of it and completely reframes the whole thing. He tells them, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Their wicked actions were the very vehicle God used to bring about a good, life-saving purpose. Okay, so if we follow this argument, if God actually ordains suffering, the next obvious question is, why? Right? If these awful things aren't just random, what possible purpose could they serve? Well, the source material we're looking at lays out a few key reasons from its perspective. First, the text argues that suffering can keep us humble. It points to the Apostle Paul and his thorn in the flesh as an example. Second, it can build character. Testing our faith actually makes our endurance grow. And third, and this one is really counterintuitive, it can actually advance a cause or a message, forging paths where none existed before. And it's interesting, the source even uses some modern data to kind of support this idea. This chart shows that within the church, the poorest group gives a significantly higher percentage of their income than the richest. The argument being made here is that maybe, just maybe, hardship can actually foster virtues like generosity. And there are these powerful little stories used to illustrate this idea of suffering advancing the message, like this one about a missionary in India. He goes to a village, they totally reject him, so he just collapses, exhausted, under a tree. But when he wakes up, the whole town is there. Why? The chief explains that when they saw his blistered feet, the physical evidence of his journey and his suffering, they decided he must be a holy man. And suddenly, they wanted to hear what he had to say. His pain literally became his passport. So all of this, it builds to the source's ultimate conclusion. And it's this idea of a profound hope. A hope that, in this view, doesn't exist in spite of suffering, but actually comes through it. It's a total reframing of pain, not as some meaningless tragedy, but as a tool with a final transcendent purpose. The authors use this poem by Martha Snell Nicholson to really land this final idea. The thorn, right, which is a symbol for our pain and suffering, it's not given alone. The poem says it comes with an added grace. It's suggesting that the pain itself might be a kind of strange, paradoxical gift. And here's the core of it. From this perspective, the thorn of suffering isn't just meaningless cruelty. It's argued to serve this incredible purpose. It acts like a pin that pulls back a veil, letting us see something about God that we would have never seen otherwise, something that was hidden before. And this is all brought home with an absolutely staggering story. Years after a Wadadani tribesman named Mincaye helped spear a missionary, Nate Saint, to death, he actually became like a grandfather to Nate's son, Steve. And then, as Steve's own daughter was dying from a cerebral hemorrhage, it was Mincaye, the man who had killed his father, who knelt beside him and said, "Don't you see? God himself is doing this." It's this unbelievable perspective, seeing God's direct hand even in the midst of that kind of tragedy. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from the source material. If suffering really can be a thorn that pins back a veil, we have to ask, what is it that we're supposed to see? In this theological framework, pain isn't a pointless detour from the story. It's a painful but purposeful revelation of the story itself.